Welcome to our class. We will continue with the surface plane, element number 5, and continue looking at content strategy. So we are at the surface plane and we are developing the finished product. And this is where the content, functionality, and the aesthetics come together. We are continuing with our content development. So good design portrays content in addition to communicating a message and communicating a feeling. When we interact with a product, be it a website, electronic document, printed material, or other, we are interacting with content. Content exists in the form of text, or media, which you might hear termed as copy. Navigation is content. Visual design is content. And a content strategy is the effort to present this content or information in a manner that is meaningful, useful, or relevant. Content strategy is actually a discipline in of itself, which defines how you are going to use the content to meet your goals and objectives and user needs. So you see that we are going back to our first element, the strategy. It is a process which guides the decisions throughout the entire life cycle of the product being developed. And it also will help us set ways to measure success. Content is useless unless it supports a goal, supports an objective, or fulfills a user need. So our goals and objectives and identification of the user and the needs were already determined at the strategy plane. If you're not meeting a user need, you are not delivering successful content. And here I have this little image here where it says press any key to start, and you have this old lady trying to figure out where is the any key. The content, which is the message, was not clear to the user, or it didn't take into consideration who the user might be. Therefore, the goal was not met and the content was unsuccessful. Here again, our content strategy, if you're not meeting your goals and objectives, you're not delivering successful content. Here is a screenshot taken from a while back from healthcare.gov. Sorry, we can't find that page. Obviously, this was a problem. There was a product that people were trying to sign up for, and they were not able to. Alright, so here's our 5 elements again, and we're down to looking at the strategy and also the scope plane. And if you remember, this is where we started itemizing the content that we're going to be using, and also looking at the functional specifications that we would be needing. So now we're revisiting this content with respect to bringing it together on the surface of our product. Alright, so the scope plane is where we had the content audit. We organized, categorized, identified it, identified our users, the stakeholders, our objectives. If you recall, this was where we should have started to develop our wording, our phrasing, how we're going to spell something, etc. Because in our content, we need consistency, and we also need to remember we're supporting our objectives and users. So let's take a look at the 2 images I have on the right. Supposing you were selling a product, such as a laptop. Are you going to call it a laptop, or are you going to call it a notebook? This is what you have to decide on, the terminology, the preferred words. And you need to be consistent. You need to call it the same thing all the time. With respect to content, spelling, grammar, punctuation, if I had a series of items, am I going to put commas between all of them? Or am I going to leave off the comma before the one with the conjunction here? Or, here again, we need consistency. So this is what some of the things that we were looking at the content scope plane, and if they weren't looked at that point, we need to look at them now. Alright, so some content writing guidelines. How will we get their attention and how will we keep it? Alright, the answer is to convey a message. Alright, so if we're conveying a meaningful message, we have their attention and hopefully we'll keep it. What is that message? That message has to do with the goals and objectives and the audience. Alright, so the message is usually read. It could be reading information. The message could be to read something. And a lot of times it is. The message could be to buy. The message could be sign up, to click, to choose, to call. So with respect to putting our content on our product, web page, print media, etc., less content is easier to manage, more user-friendly, it costs less to create, and it's easier to maintain. Therefore, we want to make sure that our message is clear and concise. The verb tense, watch your verb tenses, keep them the same. A rule of thumb is that no matter what the message is, what the content is, you can probably cut the word count by half. And here again, we're usually using a conversational style, especially on the web. Here again, it depends on the context. Lists. Lists should be used when you have a sequence of items or a numbered sequence of items. They're definitely more user-friendly and they lend themselves to being scannable. Short sentences, not run-on sentences. So let's take an example of these two. Here we have Mary went to the store because she needed milk as she had friends coming over for coffee. It's long and it's too long, on and on and on. Here we have two short sentences. Mary went to the store for milk. She had friends coming over for coffee. So keep in mind when you're writing the content. Paragraphs. Some guidelines for your paragraphs. One topic per paragraph. The main idea should be introduced first. So in other words, we're getting to the point. Here again, it holds the reader's interest. It captivates their attention. And obviously, you want to keep things as short as possible. We looked at this concept of chunking information, making information scannable, breaking content into lists, hyphens, colons, and dashes, using titles and subtitles, tables, charts, and graphs, rather than just a lot of verbiage. Images should be used to convey a message. You should invest in professional quality images. We looked at white space as being very valuable with adding contrast and focusing attention. If there is a text description or connected with an image, do not Photoshop the text onto the image. Make that text HTML and make sure that everything is accessible. We will talk about accessibility in a later class. Okay, some other guidelines with respect to pronouns. Making sure your user understands who is doing what. So I have two scenarios here. The first sentence, Jane told Ginny that her boyfriend was amusing. Alright, so whose boyfriend are we talking about? Her. Who does her refer to? Does it refer to Ginny or does it refer to Jane? A better way of writing this, Jane said, in quotations, Ginny, your boyfriend is amusing. We have this habit of using these pronouns, and in combination with several nouns, and sometimes it's not clear. The clearer the message, the better attention we have from the user. Using clear modifiers. All right, here I have a sentence and a revised sentence. Dressed with balsamic vinegar, Doug bought a salad to the potluck. Who was dressed? All right, here's the revision. Doug bought a salad with balsamic vinegar dressed to the potluck. Sometimes we don't realize, we just write, and because it makes sense to us, we think it makes sense to the user. Make sure that it is clear, or the user will be confused, and that is not user-centered content. Avoiding idioms is usually considered a good rule of thumb. Here again, you do want to use your own discretion. It's a piece of cake. Here again, from the user's point of view, you need to make that decision on your own. Spelling out acronyms. When you're creating content that involves acronyms, the proper format is to spell out the acronym first, in parentheses write the acronym, and from there on in it is considered proper to use it. Don't assume that the user knows what that acronym means. Spell it out first, and this is the way you do it. It is also considered good content guidelines to avoid certain words, to use a positive tone, and to use simple, short words. Removing redundancies. For example, in my past experience, well, I guess it was the past experience, unless it was the future, but experience by default means past. Close proximity. Do we need to say close? Basic fundamentals. All right, isn't that a little redundant? The same exact thing. Be aware of phrases that we use in our everyday language, and make sure that that is not included in your content. Inflated phrases, not considered a good idea. On account of the fact, we can simply use because. All of a sudden, we can simply use suddenly. In order to, we can simply just say to. Here again, we can reduce the number of words by 50%. It's easier for the user. It keeps the user's attention. Another principle for good content writing guidelines, try to avoid gender bias. Here we have 3 different variations of the same idea here. All right, a pianist must practice their scales. All right, there is not necessarily a good choice. A pianist must practice his or her scales. Here again, we're throwing in the genders. It just gets hard to read and to even say. All right, a pianist must practice. So if you can avoid the pronouns indirectly, it is try to do that. We looked at the style in the scope plane with respect to your taste and preferences, colors, line weights, font characteristics, bullets, shadows, margins, etc. So this is your style. All right, style is not necessarily the same as grammar. You want to be consistent in your style. How are you, if you were writing 7 o'clock in the morning, how are you going to write it? If you were going to write a phone number, how are you going to write it? You need to decide this, and you need to be consistent. Here again, the style that you choose very likely could be defined by your goals and objectives or by user characteristics. The phone number on the right here, using the dots, would probably appear to a younger person. Older people might recognize better the traditional format. So when you're defining the style in which you're going to be conveying your content, make sure that you can keep your user profile in mind. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about grammar. It has to do with the structure and rules with respect to how we use subjects, verbs, punctuations, etc. And good grammar makes for good content. There are a lot of good resources available should you have a question with respect to the grammar in your content. Some common grammar errors. It's, I-T-S. It's, with no apostrophe, is a possessive form of it. You do not have an apostrophe there. For example, the dog ate its dinner. IT apostrophe S is a contraction for two words. It is. Alright, she dressed warmly because it's cold. This is something common. I see a lot of people using the apostrophe incorrectly. Me versus I. There are rules for when to use me and when to use I. The words there, there. They all sound the same. They have distinct different meanings. Make sure that you're aware of the difference and use them correctly. Another good guideline, here again with respect to the ability to reduce our content by 50%, omit needless words, all these warm and fuzzy introductions. Instructions. You don't have to say email me at, call me at. Click here. You can just have the email address, etc. Alright. When it comes to a product such as a website, brochure, etc., we need certain things to be obvious at first. What is it about? Developing a good tagline, identifying who or what it's for, letting the user know why they should be there. We should have an obvious hierarchy, a good organization, showing the user what is important, showing the user where to start, allowing the user to see if they are able to find what they're looking for. Again, making text scannable by using titles, subtitles, headings, grouping information, using columns. Good guidelines for our content. If we have a website, the links should be brief, meaningful. No reason to use the phrase click here. It must be obvious that they are clickable, and make sure you always test them. When possible, use HTML because it's searchable, it loads faster, it's easier to edit and maintain. It is not considered a good idea to make everything as a PDF. However, PDFs can be very useful to preserve complicated formatting, such as legal documents, if you need to present something exactly as it was designed. for brochures, catalogs. PDFs can be very useful for interactive forms and electronic books. So after you have developed the content, you need to think of a plan for managing it. Content will need to be updated. So this needs to be in your plan also, how that content will be managed. And the frequency will be based on the information itself and other tests that you might be using to measure the effectiveness. In the event that you might be managing user-generated content, such as things that a user might send, make sure that you have information for the user: recommendations, requirement, restrictions, privacy policies, terms of use, etc. So here's an example from a website where the user has the ability to send a photo and a little story attached. And here you see some guidelines.